has to change now. Getting together with folks who care, having meaningful conversations, just getting maybe an inch of progress, one new idea. That's what keeps me going. I like jazz. Does anybody else like jazz?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I was watching the documentary series on jazz that included Wynton Marsalis. That was so great. It came, I don't know, what did it come out like 8 years ago? Wynton Marsalis used this really great image when he was talking about jazz. He was talking about the interplay of the musicians and the process of their playing and how each one is listening to everybody else. Some people are shining in certain moments and being the soloist, and at other times the focus is really on, okay, how do we all blend? And he uses this as an example, as an analogy for democracy, which I think is really cool. Democracy is a process, right? And you know, and even, so most of my education was actually in philosophy, so I'm going to start getting philosophical. But I was even thinking about, you know, art and what we consider beautiful. It's not just about a particular object or a particular sound in a particular moment. It's about a process. If it's music, that's obvious, right? If it's art that really engages us brings us through a process so that we're really engaged and something new happens, right? We engage with some ideas and we get new ideas in our minds. And Wynton Marsalis was talking about how, you know, it's tough. Democracy is hard to do. When I was an undergraduate in philosophy, I was talking to a good friend who really was on the same page with me about a lot of different ideas. And one day we were saying, you know, it would be great if we could have an island. You know, if we could have our own island where we could just be, and we could have our ideas and we can talk about them. Well, that was 25 years ago. I think I'd be pretty bored on that island at this point, right? My brain would probably be getting pretty static. And I want to use that image because that's my idea of community, and that's my idea of what's great about employment. Employment is this great opportunity. It's this great process that we engage in, and we create our society. And we have to balance off of each other. It's not always easy. We get challenged, we get new ideas, and we, in the best case scenario, are inspired and through practice, etc., really can go beyond what we even thought we were capable of, right? And to me, that's kind of what art is. You know, it's those kinds of interactions where a result can be, wow, something kind of transcendent, something that goes beyond what we thought was possible and that we could imagine before. Coffee. So with that image in mind, here's the PowerPoint that I created, and if we don't, you know, thankfully Sandi made a copy for everybody, so even if we don't get it up on the board, that's okay. So I started out with the California Employment First policy, and I would put a lot of money on the fact that you folks have probably all seen this and you've probably all read it. So, you know, I'm not putting this in here, you know, to say, hey, guess what? But just that every time I read it, I notice different things in there. You know, my brain kind of is like, oh yeah, there's that part. And I think it's important for us to just kind of go back and look at it sometimes and remind ourselves what it actually says. And, you know, it's basically the Lanterman Act, right? Is everybody familiar with the Lanterman? Yeah, okay, good. So my next slide, what I say is that employment first includes everyone. When we were first starting to roll out employment first with our service providers in the Golden Gate region, it was pretty natural for a lot of folks to be asking questions immediately about, well, this doesn't apply to these people, right? You know? And you might have been in that same sort of conversation yourself. For example, we have a provider who does employment services, they have a day program, they have a senior program. And so the manager of the senior program said, okay, well, I'm not going to attend this meeting, obviously. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, you know, my folks they're older, they're seniors. And I asked her to think about how many people in her program have never had the opportunity, have never been asked if they wanted to work, who still don't even know what work is, right? Who don't know the meaning of work in our culture. Thank you. All right. So do I just tap to advance? Enter, okay. All right.
You can put in the chair.
Huh? Oh, yeah, thank you. See, I'm kind of tech savvy. So I talked about senior citizens. I mean, that's the kind of thing that really grabs me. You know, when I think about how many people I've met through my, 30 years in this field, who've never had the real chance, who've never had a real choice. So senior citizens, of course, people with severe physical and or intellectual challenges are specifically mentioned in the Employment First policy. And, you know, I always like to say we need to include the people who don't know what work is. Okay?
Maura, can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
John Rodriguez became a member of Alameda County Media Council again, and he couldn't make it today. So I'm going to quote my good friend, John Rodriguez, because you're talking about including everyone.
Yes.
He always says, everyone needs to be a job developer. I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. So everyone needs to be a job developer. And I guess that was sort of what I was hinting at with my first page. You know, it's kind of like, okay, you know, it's not going to, one agency is not going to be able to create employment first. One regional center is not going to be able to make employment first happen. One QA specialist certainly is not going to be able to make employment first happen. So we all have to be, we have to all include ourselves as well. So it's about community inclusion. It's about real person-centered planning, right? Not just we do person-centered plans, but real person-centered planning. It's about informed choice. And it's not a statement that every person we support must get a job. And I know you guys know that, but that's something that comes up a lot. You know, people talk about personal choice and they say, well, you know, Maura has been in this program for about 20 years and I know her really well. She's very happy here. She has a lot of friends. She makes a paycheck. You know, she doesn't really care what the amount is, but she really enjoys getting the paycheck. And, you know, it seems pretty clear. I asked her, does she want to stay here at our program, or does she want to do something else? And she said she wants to stay here. Well, obviously, that's not a real choice, right? So our responsibilities, given that situation, and what I mean by our is, our entire system, and not just providers, not just regional centers, education, DOR, employers, right? Everybody needs to be at the table. We all need to raise our own expectations, and we need to support other people to raise their expectations about what's possible in life for people. Sometimes it seems that folks who have a hard time imagining possibilities for folks with some sort of disability are not so great at imagining possibilities for their own lives, so that can be a very personal conversation in some ways. But it's absolutely crucial. It's absolutely crucial. We have to remove imposed dead ends. And what I mean by that is basically false choices or situations that we set up where the person is going to be trapped, And of course, we have to think about health and safety, obviously. That comes first. But that doesn't mean everybody should live in a hospital, right? You're supposed to laugh sometimes. Actively and unceasingly listen to people. And that might sound a little hippie-ish or something. I didn't grow up in California, so it's not. Okay. That's what we have to do, right? That's our responsibility. Every single one of us who's in this system. We are responsible to support people to become as informed as possible about community integrated life and the options available to them. And that's, of course, a multi-part statement. But I see that as the core of the purpose of services for people. It's to help them envision things, to help them make decisions, to support them to engage and then be able to make informed decisions and hopefully achieve even more than they had expected. To become artists in their own lives, perhaps. And we need to provide opportunities for people to make real choices, similar to those that typical people make, of course. So not, gee, Maura, do you want to stay in this day program or do you want to get some ice cream? That's pretty meaningless, obviously. And really, it's all getting back to the Lanterman Act. It's all there. So it's really not anything new. And so just to use GGRC as an example, it's kind of a double-edged sword to have made some progress, with Employment First, with Golden Gate Regional Center, because we've been able to develop some useful tools. We've had some terrific conversations with people. A lot of folks have really developed new ideas and new ways to implement those ideas. But sometimes it sort of becomes, I've heard people say to me, oh, gee, I was told, well, gee, Golden Gate Regional Center does this. Why don't we do it? And that's certainly not helpful. And it's absolutely not about what we did ourselves at the regional center. It was about collaboration, of course. Any progress, any positive stuff that we did, including ideas, etc., came through real collaboration. So first of all, we had, this is a little bit of a kind of timeline. There was an employment task force formed for Golden Gate Regional Center approximately 10 years ago, something like that. I wasn't there at the time. And the basic idea just was, hey, let's get some of us around the table and think about this issue. And the Employment Task Force has always been inclusive of service providers, folks from the regional center, folks from the community, our self-advocate, and other interested folks. And that's where the progress came from. That was the seedbed. It was people coming together. They created Golden Gate Regional Center's Employment First policy, which I guess, gee, it's 3 years now? Something like that. Which basically says pretty much what the state law says. And then we created an employment data sheet, and the basic idea with that was not just to collect data. For example, who's working, who's not, who wants to work, who wants to work more hours, what are people getting paid, those sorts of things, which, you know, that's really important stuff. Of course, we need that. But also having this form and training the supports coordinators to bring this to every meeting and asking every provider to make sure that they have this discussion with folks at every annual meeting gets it on the agenda, you know, because when you have a meeting and you don't have something guiding the discussion, you know, you could end up talking about all kinds of things, obviously. So we wanted to make sure that employment was part of the discussion, essentially. Then we came up with the idea of employment summits, and I'm trying to think how to describe. Basically, what we were thinking was, first of all, we want to bring everybody together. We want to bring the CEOs of our providers together, and we want to convey to them how important this is. And we want to get the ball rolling. You know, we want to get people thinking. We want to start developing some ideas. So we ended up having, they happened approximately quarterly, and that was over, I guess we started in the fall of 2013, yeah. And so the first one was kind of like, okay, you know, here we are. And some people were, you know, a little uncertain and hesitant, and naturally, you know, this was a big issue that a lot of people hadn't really given much thought to. Then we started bringing in trainings, and the Employment Task Force at the same time was continuing to meet, and that group was largely the planning body for the summits, for gathering the feedback, thinking about what should happen at our next training, at our next summit, what kind of information do we need to share at this stage, what's changed, you know, legislatively, et cetera, and what needs to go into these summits. And somehow the word summit, I think, has been useful because it conveys, there's something about the term that conveys that the people who are putting it on consider it really important. And, you know, we never said, this is mandatory. You know, you have to come. You must come to this meeting. But we strongly encouraged people, let's put it that way. And by using the term summit, I think that was part of us saying, look, you know, we have to. We can't ignore this. And we absolutely, all of us, this, you know, across the state, every provider can do better, every regional center can do better with getting more self-advocates involved. And obviously with our budgetary situation now, it's crucial, you know. People need to speak up and let the state know that they are there and they care about what happens. I don't know what you guys call your vendor advisory committee. Is that what okay, here. We called it this, the Service Provider Advisory Committee. Anyway, the VAC, hugely important in this process. It was a great place for us to bring ideas and policies that we were starting to develop, some tools to bring them to the Vendor Advisory Committee for feedback. And the folks who come to the vendor advisory committee, you know, they tend to be the folks who really care. Like you folks, right? You're here in the room, you're the ones who are really committed to this. And so they were able to give real thought, careful thought to the process as we went along. We started having one-on-one vendor meetings. Obviously, every vendor is different. Every person is different. Every consumer is different. And there is no one size fits all. And that is, of course, the message of person-centered planning. So we couldn't just say, okay, here's the template. This is the way all programs need to look by the end of 2015. We needed to go to each vendor on their turf to sit down and talk about what would progress be for you. Not what's your goal, you know, what's the finished product, how are you going to reach this ideal that we have set up, but how can you assist folks in your program with your services to make progress? And that can look a million different ways. So that can be totally individualized. And it also took a lot of the pressure off of the vendors. Of course, we are getting genuine pressure from the state and from the federal government and from families, et cetera, that people want things to change. People want services to be different. But we can't do that overnight. We can't close our program and then, you know, like an umbrella, and then the next day open it. Okay, we're something else, right? So always, always reiterating that word progress, I think was really helpful. And then connecting with other regional centers, with DDS, with state and national consortiums and institutes. You know, reaching out, and Bill mentioned that your group is sort of at that stage where you're just trying to put out your feelers and gather information about what's happening. And that, of course, that's absolutely what we did too. That's crucial. What are best practices? There is one of the fabulous things about Employment First right now, and the fact that we must deal with it, is that there are so many resources. It's amazing. It's really amazing. And there are so many really sharp, really committed folks with great ideas that we can tap into. And so that's been an ongoing process, of course, at Golden Gate. And a very important part of that is the California Employment Consortium for Youth. I don't know if that rings bells with folks, but that's the group that sponsored the community conversation that you folks had. Really, really, really great group. Okay, and just to continue, so we, you know, thought, all right, how do we start this? How do we help people to start implementing? We had a training on tailored day services. We talked about braided funding, and we did a training on customized employment. And of course, that was just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other things that we need to address through training. And as Sandi said, quoting the person she knows, I didn't pick up the name, we all need to be job developers in a way. We need to change our mindset so that we are really trying to always look for opportunities and always think about how can we assist people to engage. We did what was called a Transformation Institute, and that involved Karen Flippo from the University of Massachusetts, the Institute for Community Inclusion, an unbelievable resource. And by the way, they have just recently started offering they have a doctoral program now in community inclusion, which I think is really, I think I'm going to do that next year, actually.
Maura, can
It sounds great, though.
just
Oh, yeah.
break in? I had sent that training out and I was actually signed up for it and couldn't make it, but I do think that that's a great resource for it.
Oh, yeah. And the thing I love about, one of the things that really keeps me in this field is those opportunities to talk to people who think creatively, who are committed, and have that little bit of optimism, you know, where they're just like, let's try it. Let's try it. I worked at a service provider in Philadelphia for a while that had all different kinds of challenges. And there wasn't a lot of receptivity about new ideas. It was kind of like, you know what, we tried that. That's not going to work. No, no. That's a nice idea, but you know, okay, thanks. Thanks for your input. Well, I really feel, you know, maybe it's partially a cultural thing in California. I don't know. I'm still forming my theories about the differences between the Northern California and where I grew up near New York. But people are interested in ideas that I've encountered much more than in other situations I've been in. I think it's also because of the times, because people are realizing that this is actually an interesting issue. It's not just something scary, it's something we can really dig into and be creative with. So the idea of the Transformation Institute, pardon me, was to really try to get people to think about, okay, what is my service? So it included lots of executive directors from providers. Those were the primary folks who attended. And also folks from the regional centers, folks from DDS, and other places. And Karen just basically tried to take us through a process of thinking about, okay, what am I doing? What's my business? What's my mission? Where do I need to start shifting things to make progress towards this? And to some extent, you know, what do we need to transform in our own cultures where we work? And, you know, sometimes in our own mindsets having to do with expectations. And believe it or not, it was fun. So it sounds kind of heavy, but it actually was, she was terrific. She's a wonderful person. Pardon me. So, pardon me. Just gonna have a sip of coffee. So we couldn't keep using the same quality assurance tools that we, you know, developed 20 years ago, because everything we were looking at and everything we were striving for was changed in some way in light of employment first and community inclusion and informed choice. So that was a big effort, and it's continuing. One of the things that I'm engaged with in North Bay now is doing just that, developing those tools. So we're experimenting with how to get started there. And so that's where we're starting, at least for now. And also, I attended my first vendor advisory committee meeting there. I'm so sorry. It's spring. I have allergies. And so that's my other thought, is I definitely want to connect with the vendors at every opportunity. So.
We have this shared.
Yeah, they're fast. Maybe we could have a race after we're done. So we also wanted to try to assist vendors to think about kind of intangible stuff like our culture. We developed a self-assessment tool that vendors could use to look at different components of their program, to look at, you know, just kind of what direction are we going in, and to rate themselves, basically 1 through 3, and then to, not that everybody was supposed to be at a 3, oh, we've accomplished this. Certainly not. The point was to really look at different components of what was happening. Very exciting was that we were, certainly we did not cause, Golden Gate Regional Center didn't cause the San Francisco to create an employment advisory committee, but we were part of the pressure on the city and the engagement with some really receptive folks and some terrific supervisors over there. And so they developed this San Francisco Employment Advisory Committee with the long-term goal of actually bringing a person into HR for the city. Somebody who can not only recruit folks, not only pinpoint jobs for folks who have different kinds of disabilities, but somebody who can customize a job, somebody who can support people, somebody who understands the needs of folks with different kinds of disabilities. And that's actually happening in Seattle now. Washington is doing some really interesting things. Some of them I don't think we'd want to duplicate. They've definitely been experimenting in a lot of ways. But one absolute success was Heather Weldon and her creation of this model of getting more folks employed by the city. And of course, in most counties, the county is the biggest employer. And what a great model, for the private sector to have the public sector really commit. And then we also had a community conversation through CC. And, oh, so sorry.
And you know what Maura's referring to, because we had one here in Alameda County, and then after hours, they had one in, I don't know if it's GGRC or a particular county.
It was San Francisco County.
Okay.
So we decided that, really every county is a different community. And so it wouldn't make sense to try to have a community conversation to cover San Francisco, Marin, and San Mateo. So the long-term plan is to have a conversation in each county. And that, of course, was an opportunity, as you folks did, to bring employers into the conversation and to really try to get people to think about this issue who don't normally think about it. It wasn't just a conference, right? It wasn't just people sharing information with each other. It was really trying to engage folks from the community who don't usually think about this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, with all that, right, every time we turn around, it seems, there's something new coming from the state or the federal government these days. So the U.S. Department of Justice has very, very actively gotten involved with states about employment first. Some of you may be familiar with the case of Rhode Island. This was initiated by a staff person at a provider who said, people are not getting real opportunities. People are being funneled. Kids are being funneled from high school directly into day programs, traditional day programs, or sheltered workshops, and that's it. They're not given any real choices. And the Department of Justice went in there and they cracked the whip and they forced Rhode Island essentially to create a very brief timeline with very specific numbers in terms of goals of who's going to be doing what, and that they would have to achieve these certain levels of people who were employed. And this is happening in other states as well, as you know. Taking different courses and, of course, beginning from different places. But basically the message is the same. The Department of Justice is going to get involved.
Could you, do you know what is the Department of Justice's protocol for choosing how they get involved in these various states, or what prompted them to?
Sure. First of all, there has to be an actual complaint. So anybody in California can lodge a complaint about California not doing employment first and not integrating folks into the community. Basically, that they are failing to provide for people's civil rights. And then the Department of Justice will come out and they'll research the situation. And I think one of the major issues, and I certainly can't speak specifically to what they look at, but they want to see, is there any attempt to change the situation? Is there real community integration happening? Is there movement towards it? So they don't expect all the states to be perfect, but they need to feel that something is happening here. That it's not just a bunch of roadblocks. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So their complaint would be filed against the state, okay, and the state has to have a complaint.
On behalf of someone.
On behalf of someone.
Right, yeah. So another thing that has changed, and I don't know when, but the California Department of Education made some changes to the way they monitor how schools are doing. And maybe somebody here from education can tell me, I can't remember the phrase for the way they discuss their criteria, but they've changed the criteria that they look at so that now they're not only looking at, okay, what are you doing with kids while they're in the school, but what are they doing afterwards? So they're really saying to the schools, we need to absolutely think about kids as developing and becoming adults and becoming members of the community. And we're going to try to measure that. Pardon me.
Maura, can I add one
Absolutely.
thing to that? We don't have Maura McDonough here. She's our San Lorenzo program specialist. She had an emergency IEP meeting. But it is evidence-based that transition programs in California have abysmal employment outcomes. So I'm sure that was one of the motivating factors.
Absolutely.
One of the things is my daughter attended OUSD. They call every year to see what she's doing and whether or not she's working. Until I probably won't get a call this year because she's 22, but they do call and see, which to me is ridiculous since you're not involved in her life for the last 4 years because she graduated with a diploma. But that's one thing they ought to say, that we're keeping track of our students, but more than keeping track, they need to do something. So.
Absolutely. But see, and so I can totally see your perspective that
Tell them no.
they're asking her this, over and over every year, and it's always the same answer. And sorry, you want me to say, oh, yeah, she has a full-time job, she's doing great, and it's all thanks to the schools that she attended, right? So, but that'll give people a baseline. Right, we are sorely lacking data, real data that tells us real information about where we're at and where we compare with other states, etc. The CMS settings rules came in with their requirements for HCBS funding, and HCBS stands for Home and Community-Based Services. The federal government provides, I think it's over 50% of the money that goes into our system in California. And it's through these waivers that are based on the concept that we have agreed not to place folks into developmental centers, but to have them live in the community, and that we're going to support them to do that. Pardon me. And that's the case for most states. That's that's typical at this point. But basically, the federal government said, you know, you're not really doing that. That's not what you're doing. You're not spending the money to really get people integrated into their communities. And so that also is not something new. They're pointing out that we have failed in our part of the bargain. And so they're saying, well, you know, you can do what you want. You can have the kind of services that you want to have in your state, but we're not going to pay for them unless they are genuinely community-based and really are helping people to become independent and become integrated and make their own choices. So that's huge, of course, for every state in the country. Every state needs to come up with a transition plan that will tell the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services where they're at and where they're going to go, the changes that they're going to be making. And the CMS has rejected most of the plans that have been submitted because states are not really conveying or understanding how far they are from the goal. I think California's is still kind of in process. They are doing kind of an interesting dance with the states because they want to allow autonomy to the states in terms of how they're going to make this happen. And I think they're also trying to generate ideas. And I think also that they don't have, you know, they can't tell all of us exactly what to do and make it work. That's because that's never worked. So this is a very interesting time. And of course, I'll just mention that that includes residential services, it includes transportation, basically, not transportation specifically, but what they're asking the states is to look at their whole system, their whole service system, and how are we where are we providing services and what are we working towards. There was the federal government saying that contractors with them could no longer pay folks sub-minimum wage. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about sub-minimum wage now. And there's, you know, and I really can see both sides of it. There are people, the simple fact though, I really think is that sub-minimum wage is going to be discontinued. That its life expectancy is very short at this point, and the responsible thing for us to do, it seems to me, is to engage with this process and prepare for it. Start thinking about our services beyond sub-minimum wage and what would that look like. I don't think our energy being put into fighting the discontinuation of sub-minimum wage, I'm not sure that that is energy well spent. We'll see. The federal government also used the number 7% in terms of what they thought should be the percentage of folks with disabilities who are employed by the government. So that 7% number has been tossed around by a lot of different people. And a lot of folks are saying, yeah, that's a good number. And 7% would be a lot of people. That would be huge if, you know, even if we achieved 3% in our public sphere.
Are you talking about, when you say government, are you talking about all government, or are you talking about?
Well, I was saying if, you know, if this were adopted, if that number were adopted, it hasn't been.
But I'm asking, so when you say government, you're talking about all government.
Right.
Every level would have
Exactly.
7%.
Anybody who's an employer, any entity, public entity that's an employer, that is funded by taxpayers' money, essentially.
I say actually that 7% is actually an executive order for all federal contractors must have 7% of their workforce have a disability. The challenge is it's voluntary because people do not have to disclose that they have a disability. So it's
Right.
one of the pushes for that, but it is one where the 7% is a major push, and a lot of people are actually federal contractors and don't actually realize it. If they push it out to the extreme, regional centers are also major federal contractors because they get major federal dollars.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, how you look at that, but that 7% was an executive order and is in effect. The big challenge is, how do you measure that? Because I can't make you tell me that you have a disability.
That is difficult, but the federal government is saying that they have raised the percentage of people with disabilities in their workforce. So it's had some good effect.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the perennial issue, right, with trying to set a specific target. But that issue of disclosing or not disclosing is a huge one for folks, no doubt about it. And then WIOA, which has, basically is a revamped, is talking about how the Department of Rehabilitation needs to do a lot more with transition age folks in terms of supporting them to think about employment, to develop skills, and to seek employment and be supported in employment. The one-stop job centers that we have, they're now called American or America's? Okay, I can't remember. AJC. They're supposed to be a generic resource that's available to everybody. In theory, we should be able to bring folks that we support, or we ourselves should be able to go there and ask for assistance. And what's been happening, of course, is that some people try that, and for the most part, they're not getting assistance. They're being told that, oh, we can't do it. I'm sorry. We don't know what to do. And that's just not going to be acceptable anymore. So we'll see. Of course, no money was attached to WIOA, and DOR is just as stretched as every other entity at this point. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Maura, do you want to mention the phone calls that they've been having? I know some of us have been on.
Please do, Sandy.
Phone calls, or Will, I think you probably were on, and I know Bill was. Would you like to mention WIOA? And
The WIOA is the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. It's one of those acts that we had 2 last year that went from 0 to passed when they were on the books or being talked about for almost 7 or 8 years. And in about a month and a half, they went from nowhere to done. So it really reauthorized the workforce boards. Department of Rehab made all kinds of changes, and the Department of Rehab is trying to do outreach. They've had a series of sort of conference calls where they do seek some input into the process. They had one for support employment providers last week, yeah, and I listened to it for 2 hours, so yeah.
over 300 people on the call.
Out there, the big challenge is the regulations related to that have not been issued. WIOA actually went into effect for certain things for Department of Rehab as of July 1st last year. So they're being measured on things that they don't know they're being measured on because they haven't seen the rule book. So that's where they are. Big one is there's no money. The other one, the big push on the youth, is that the use of subminimum wage can only be used after you have exhausted, and that's sort of an unclear term, efforts to get into integrated competitive opportunities. So that's going to really shift the game a lot on how that one all plays. So you have to sort of pay attention to what's out there, and those rules are coming out sometime this spring, and we'll see.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, same thing with the CMS rules, that everybody's sort of waiting for more specifics, and we'll see. But we're supposed to be implementing it anyway, even though we don't have specific guidelines.
Do you have a number for those conference calls if we want to give our input? Or?
Sandy?
Yes, if you shoot me an email, I'm have sometimes been accused of being a serial email reader, but I will mail you that information.
Okay.
They're pretty interesting. It's certainly interesting to hear the perspectives of providers from across the state and how DOR is responding. So another recent happening is that basically kind of at the invitation of Disability Rights California, the Department of Developmental Services, the Department of Rehab, and California Department of Education have sat down at the same table to talk about employment first. And that's huge. That's really, really huge. And they have created a memo of understanding. They've committed to creating what they're calling a blueprint for making employment first happen in California in 6 months. So it's less than 6 months now. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, what are we at?
We have 3 months left.
3 months left. 3 months left. It's pretty interesting, for sure. It will be, how do you feel about it, Will? I mean, I just feel like it's going to be fascinating.
It'll be fascinating. Your term is invitation. Basically, Disability Rights California has a complaint ready to go to the
Right.
Department of Justice at the federal level, and that was sort of the really large hammer they use, especially to get CDE to the table. We'll see. I mean, their goals have a blueprint that'll line up a little bit with the CMS rule, which
Right.
means in 4 years they'll have stuff in place. We'll see. I mean, they're the big players in that whole game. CDE really has a transition. Those of us who know in the schools, CDE has very little ability to impact the local level because you have school districts, which are elected school boards, and they get to make up all their own rules. So the challenge for them to really make a huge difference will be interesting to see what happens there. But
Absolutely.
they're having a conversation.
And one of the really terrific things is that there's no way for this to happen. There's no way we're going to succeed if we don't collaborate, right? There's just no way. If education isn't part of this, we're not going to really change California and really create an employment-first environment for folks. If the Department of Rehab kind of keeps doing what they're doing, if the Department of Developmental Services doesn't create some real leadership about this, you know, it's interesting because as I wasn't going to use the word hammer or gun to the head, those terms, but there is real pressure on these folks at this table to do something real. And I can't imagine that it would be possible without some money. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah, fascinating. Local and regional consortiums, sharing what works with each other and the state, okay. So basically I'm just talking about the importance of, again, collaboration. We can't afford to all recreate the wheels at every regional center or at every service provider in every program. We don't have the money, we don't have the staff, we don't have the time. We have to collaborate. There are so many great things going on, and we can really spur each other on to come up with ideas and hopefully, you know, real implementation concepts to roll out. And things are happening in different places around the state that are very, very interesting to check out. May is coming up, right? And Will, I know you'll be at the meetings, the budget meetings that are coming up. And what our system through the Lanterman Coalition has agreed to really focus on this year is the concept of a 10% increase to funding. But the thing to remember is that is truly a Band-Aid. That is truly a Band-Aid. I was talking to Jim Shorter at Golden Gate And they are trying to work out specifically how much money they would need to actually provide the services they're mandated to provide in the proper way and that sort of thing, what the real shortfall is. He said it's about 40%. So, and that's just one regional center, right? It is a regional center in a very, very expensive area. So, you know, chances are inland is not in quite such bad shape. But the rate we have to always follow, when we talk about that 10%, we have to say, and we have to change the rate structures. We have to get things unfrozen. It's, you know, they're just, every part of our system is damaged, really damaged, and having, you know, it's extremely difficult to make real progress. And there are some very common sense things we could do as a state that we're not able to do because of these different freezes that have happened. SLS is a good example. Supported living services. Pardon me. But certainly employment, you know, supported employment programs are all losing money. Just when we need them, just when we need more supported employment programs, they're going out of business. They're going out of business. So something has to change. And so we need to own the responsibility of advocating, actively advocating and actively getting people to Sacramento, getting people to advocate for themselves and for their families. Entitlement doesn't mean much if there are no programs, right? And, you know I'm speaking to the choir, but we really do need to make a real push. And some people are a little optimistic because a lot of legislators have been saying that they're on board, that this might be a good time for progress between now and May. Pardon me. Not everybody's optimistic, but if you want to start making that effort, getting the folks you support to start advocating for themselves, telling their families that they need to get out to Sacramento, they absolutely need to contact their legislators because they're going to lose services. This is the time. This is the time. Will, do you want to, or Sandi, anybody who wants to?
I can add, last council meeting, we approved a letter to go to Governor Brown supporting the Lantern Coalition's 10% ask, so to speak, and that is in your packets.
Yeah, I was going to say the other one is we're in Alameda County, and one of the key budget committees is Assembly Sub 1, and the chair is the recently elected Tony Thurman. So if your folks want to not necessarily go to Sacramento, but make regular treks every day to his district office and say, hey, we're really worried about this. I mean, he has information about our system. He has some background and has done some work in regional centers, so he's, you know, at least knowledgeable. But I think you really have to have the groundswell of people showing up and being there. And if you're in his district, that's even more so. But as a budget chair, he has that responsibility for our issues. And so for him to hear it regularly and often from his local folks, very, very important.
Before May.
Well, and the issue is before March, and the first hearing in the Assembly is March 4th, is the Assembly Sub 1 hearing, and March 12th is the Senate. So really, those are the two big hearings where the biggest opportunity to really make a positive impact to the legislature. The governor's still going to do his thing, but if the legislature starts to have conversations really and interest in that, that may guide the governor's view of the May revise. I mean, that's sort of the best thing we can hope for, is we can sort of guide the governor to make a good decision towards us at that point.
Yeah. Is that the kind of thing that you might be able to send out to folks too, those dates for the crucial? Absolutely crucial.
Absolutely important. If I can add one more thing, I received a letter recently. We have county lobbyists, and will refresh my memory. It's not working right now. Kevin De Leon is.
He's the Senate pro tem.
Right, and he has laid out their agenda for the year, or his agenda anyway. And we're never usually on it. But one thing that is on his agenda is income inequity. So I think in our messages and our advocacy efforts, we need to embrace income inequity with our 85 to 92% unemployment rate, most people living in poverty, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so we need to also, because this is about community integration, because it's about informed choice, because it's about, real engagement and helping people to live the lives that the rest of us live, we need to look at the rest of those areas of people's lives. We need to look at housing. We need to look at transportation. We need to look at people's social lives, medical care, in addition to employment. And before I switched over to North Bay, I was talking to Jim Shorter about trying to develop some region-wide coalitions to bring folks to the table to deal with these areas. And we're really hoping that will help guide our thinking and really generate some ideas. Like I said, none of us can afford the time, the money, the energy to reinvent every wheel. We can't do it. We can't do it. And none of us can think of all the great ideas. It has to be a collaboration.
Is there a fiscal impact included in the MOU blueprint for this that they're creating?
They, as far as I know, they have made no statement whatsoever
So there's
that has
this
to do with
blueprint
money.
without any
It's not.
analysis?
They actually haven't created the blueprint yet.
Okay.
It's just the memorandum of understanding. And if you look at the Disability Rights California site, you'll be able to read the MOU. Pardon me. And it's basically, so they basically committed. That's what's happened at this point.